We have a quorum, so I'll open today's meeting. So good afternoon, members of the MAG Management Committee. This meeting is now called to order. For those around the table, please turn on your microphone when speaking. And for those participating via Zoom, please state your name when making a comment or asking a question. We will now begin the meeting with a roll call of members. Staff?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the Management Committee. I will go down the list of members alphabetically. Please unmute and indicate if you are present. Pratik Banger.
Present.
Thank you. Chair Barton.
Present.
Thank you. Ben Bitter.
Here.
Thank you. Jean Blackman. Christopher Brady.
Present.
Thank you. Greg Caton.
Here.
Thank you. Andrew Ching.
Present.
Thank you. And who is representing Avondale today as proxy for Ron Corbin?
Hi, Kimberly Moon, representing Ron Corbin for Avondale.
Thank you. Dan Cotterman.
Here.
Thank you. Henry Darwin.
Here.
Thank you. Crystal Dykes. Bruce Gardner.
Here.
Thank you. Rachel Goodwin.
Here.
Thank you. Rosa Inchowski.
Present.
Thank you. Suzanne Jones. Jeff Kulaga.
Here.
Thank you. Leo Liu. Reyes Medrano. Thank you. Jessica Mefford Miller.
Present.
Thank you. Jennifer Jack as proxy for Brian Myers.
Present.
Thank you. Grady Miller.
This is Teresa Riza, proxy for Grady Miller.
Thank you. Gary Neese. Kevin Phelps.
Present.
Thank you. Calvin Pilcher.
Present.
Thank you. Christopher Reams as proxy for Jen Pekorski. Matt Busby as proxy for Bryant Powell. Lynette
Present.
Reed. Thank you, Matt. Lynette Reed.
Present.
Thank you. Troy Smith. Jennifer Toth.
Present.
Smith, present.
Thank you. Is that Mr. Smith?
Yes, I'm present.
Thank you, sir. Catherine Valenzuela.
Present.
Thank you. Bruce Walls.
Here.
Thank you. Paige Peterson as proxy for Matthew Williams.
Present.
Thank you. Bob Wingenroth.
Present.
Thank you. Joshua Wright.
Here.
Thank you. Is there anyone that I missed? Mr. Chair, we have quorum.
Thank you. Could you please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We would also like to recognize Greg Caton, who's been appointed to serve as Scottsdale's interim city manager, and Troy Smith is the interim town manager for Wickenburg. Congratulations and welcome, Greg and Troy.
Thank you.
Our next item is called to the audience. I am told, I just want to verify with staff that we have no calls, no response, no submittals for call to the public. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And we have no online written comments for the call for the audience. Is that correct?
It's also correct. Thank you, sir.
All right. So we now proceed to item 4, which are our informational items. Items 4A through 4D are for information only. Does any member of the committee have any requests or questions or request a presentation on any of those items? Hearing none, the next item on the agenda is item 5, which is approval of the consent agenda. Items 5A through 5L are on the consent agenda. Does any member of the committee have questions or request a presentation on any of these items? Hearing and seeing none, prior to approval of the consent agenda, there's an opportunity for members to speak. Again, we've mentioned that we don't have any requests to speak. So with that being said, could I have a motion to approve consent items 5A through 5L? We have a motion from Mr. Phelps. Do we have a second?
Second.
Second, Jean Blackman.
Mr. Dayton?
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. So now we'll have all those participating in the meeting online take part in the voice vote by turning on your cameras and unmuting your audio. For those who cannot or do not want to turn on their cameras, staff will conduct a roll call vote. Members, please leave your cameras on until after the roll call vote. Can I have a voice vote of those in the room and those online? Those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, nay. Okay, staff, can you now take the roll call of members participating virtually who did not turn on their cameras?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Jean Blackman, how do you vote?
Yes.
Thank you. And the phone number 623, can you identify yourself, please? Thank you. And did I miss anyone? Very good. Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Thank you. We now move on to item number 6, which is our teen dating violence and homelessness. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion. I'd like to invite DC Ernest, Chair of our MAG Regional Domestic Violence Council, and Human Services Planner Matt Finley to present the item. We'd also like to wish Matt a happy birthday. Happy birthday, Matt. DC, take us away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee, for this opportunity to address teen dating violence and homelessness. February is recognized nationally as Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. As our youth start to date, they may find themselves in unhealthy relationships, which can lay the foundation for a lifetime of abuse. The earlier we can intervene, the healthier and happier teens will be. The road to healthy well-being can be hard, and it's even harder when a teen is unhoused. Today, we will talk about the intersection of dating violence and homelessness, knowing that this affects all of our communities and the future of our youth. Here's an overview of the presentation today. We will begin with a quick overview of ways MAG is approaching this work, a few facts about teens experiencing violence and homelessness, followed by how we can all get involved. So you may ask yourself, why is MAG involved in addressing teen dating and homelessness? It's because you asked us to. The Domestic Violence Council was formed at MAG 25 years ago in response to a local tragedy, the regional council's action to strengthen our response. Projects like the Youth Empowerment Project were created to support teens facing violence. We started supporting the continuum of care 25 years ago when the community wanted more of a regional approach to homelessness. This was validated again in 2021 when we developed Pathways Home, the regional homeless action plan for local and tribal governments. The two issues of dating violence and homelessness affect thousands of youth in our region. The CDC estimates that 1 in 12 teens reflect that they've been impacted by physical or sexual abuse. When we add in other forms of abuse, such as emotional abuse, that estimate is 1 in 3 teens. Unhoused teens are struggling with violence as well as homelessness. And the point-in-time count will reflect the most current data in a few months. I want to say thank you to all of you who participated in that effort. For now, the statistic of 831 youth is from the 2024 Homeless Management Information Systems Report. If we use that 1 in 12 statistic from the previous slide, then the total number of teens experiencing dating violence in this region is larger than the total population of Apache Junction. We know that teens experiencing violence and or homelessness as they grow up are more likely to experience it as adults as well. We need to address this now before the numbers increase anymore. I'd like to invite Matt, the birthday boy, up to the podium to share more about the intersection of teen dating violence and homelessness. That wasn't my notes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. So as DC has mentioned, youth experiencing homelessness are at a heightened risk of experiencing dating violence. We know that a conservative estimate, this is just on the low end, is 27% of homeless youth experience either sexual or physical abuse through dating violence. As I mentioned, this is just the low end. We know that there are many more youth experiencing homelessness that don't receive that ability to report this data. Now, clearly, this is a vulnerable intersection. This is a vulnerable population. And how are we going to address this? So traditional interventions we find them to be insufficient. Traditional interventions are built to address dating violence before it occurs. For many youth experiencing homelessness, violence has been a key aspect of their life, whether that was through domestic violence or dating violence at a very young age. The other piece is traditional interventions happen in traditional settings, which primarily we see that in schools. Youth experiencing homelessness have a difficult time being able to get to school for a myriad of reasons. So we know why traditional interventions are insufficient. Now, what would an effective intervention require? We know that there is mentorship to model healthy relationships, peer leadership and support networks, and co-locating services with places that homeless youth already are effective ways to support youth experiencing dating violence. Now we can move to what we're going to do to build out those interventions. So MAG and the Maricopa Regional Continuum of Care received a $1.7 million reward from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to improve the youth homeless response system statewide. This grant is able to do a lot of different things at the systems level, but when we look at how it can improve the lives of homeless youth who are experiencing dating violence, we know that it's going to bring forward 3 critical needs and 3 critical interventions. So one is it's going to create peer support roles within the youth homeless response system. That is where youth who have experienced homelessness themselves, have experienced dating violence themselves, are able to work with their peers and support them. Along with that, it will be coupled with youth mentorship, receiving mentorship from supervisors and executives across the homeless response system. And finally, this grant will really focus on building cross-system partnerships to address these intersectional challenges. As I mentioned, it's difficult for youth to be able to make it to school, but they are in other spaces. And so we will be able to build partnerships and alliances with other organizations so that interventions can be co-located in spaces where youth already are. Now, wanted to highlight a couple opportunities to get involved. As you see on the screen, there are many different options that you all can do in your communities. But one that I wanted to particularly highlight is around providing community space for support groups. There are nonprofit organizations that provide free support groups for teens and youth who have experienced any form of any traumatic experience. And they are looking for spaces to be able to provide those support groups in your communities. If that is something that you're interested in, if you know that there's a library meeting space or a senior center that isn't being used at a certain time and is available, please reach out to MAG staff and we'll be able to help connect you. And finally, I wanted to highlight, if you are interested in learning any more information or getting connected with any additional organizations that the Regional Domestic Violence Committee and the COC work with around teen dating violence, feel free to visit the MAG website, or you can scan this link to the MAG website. Thank you.
Seven is an overview of the micro trenching. This is on the agenda for information and discussion. Maggie Wong and management will present the update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, members of the committee. Today, I'll be presenting an overview of microtrenching, which is a method of fiber installation. This topic came up back in November. Vice Chair Phelps brought up this request for MAG to further explore microtrenching, including current practices and nationwide applications. This request also proposed that we convene a working group, which we'll be providing an update on today. So we'll start with some background and first look at why fiber is important to our region. So fiber is a technology that carries light signals to transmit data super fast over long distances, and it's used for high-speed internet and communications. The use of fiber really expanded in the early 2000s, and it was around that time that our region recognized a need for enhanced communication networks and connectivity. This led to regional investment in building out the infrastructure, including the Regional Community Network, or RCN, which is a network of fiber that links together member agencies to share traffic and public safety information. Additionally, local agencies partnered with service providers to expand internet access to their residents. The benefit of fiber is that it's significantly more efficient than traditional copper lines. Fiber provides better performance, higher speeds, and bandwidth, as well as extended lifetime and reliability. So fiber is important to our region because it expands the reach of high-speed internet to residents, businesses, and communities. Fiber installation involves placing conduit underground to then push the fiber and other utility lines through. So a typical method of this is called open trenching, digging these deep and wide trenches. And this can be a very labor-intensive process because it involves excavation, heavy machinery, and labor. So it can become very costly very quickly. Microtrenching is a newer method of fiber installation, and it involves saw cutting a narrow trench at shallower depths. This method is becoming more widespread across the nation as a cost-effective alternative to traditional methods of trenching. So one difference between open trenching and microtrenching is the typical placement relative to the roadway. So open trenching is typically done off the sidewalk in the dirt, creating these wide trenches, whereas microtrenching creates narrow cuts off the curb in existing asphalt. The major difference between the two, though, really is the depth. So taking a closer look at that, traditional open trenching goes to maximum depths of 48 inches, whereas microtrenching is not only a narrower cut, but also shallower with maximum depth of 18 to 24 inches. Now, the shallow depth of microtrenching leads to many benefits, but can also be associated with risks. So we're going to take a look at benefits first. Microtrenching is a quicker installation process. Because you're not digging as deep, installation can be completed as quickly as same day. This leads to reduced capital costs of installation because it's less of a labor-intensive process. And this method is also less intrusive. One major issue with open trenching is that as you dig deeper, there's a higher likelihood of hitting existing utility lines at those depths. So microtrenching is able to avoid this issue with a shallower depth, reducing risk of utility strikes. This method is also less of an environmental impact because there's less soil disruption and fewer emissions from the installation process. So microtrenching can improve the quality of life for residents and businesses by providing reliable high-speed internet access and expanding internet service options. On the other hand, the shallow depth and other aspects of microtrenching can also have associated risks. The first one we'll look at is damage to the fiber itself. Because this method places conduit and fiber closer to the surface, it may be impacted by heavy traffic loads, construction work, or even routine pavement maintenance, such as mill and overlay, especially if it's at shallower depths. So this example here is from Louisville, Kentucky, where this microtrenching project placed it at an experimentally shallow depth of about 2 inches deep. There were many issues with the fiber popping out and becoming exposed, causing to the ultimate failure of this particular project. Another risk is damage to agency infrastructure if the installation process is not done correctly. These examples here are from Anchorage, Alaska, and show the results of off-tracking that happened during the installation process. If we take a closer look at the picture on the left, this is supposed to be the intended path, just straight and smooth, but we can see in the orange here that it was not lined up correctly, causing the off-tracking during installation, and the path had to be corrected, resulting in damage to the pavement. The picture on the right similarly shows how off-tracking during the installation process damaged the sidewalks. So depending on placement, there is risk of damage to sidewalks, pavement, gutters, and even bike lanes. Microtrenching may also lead to a need for frequent repairs. This example here is from Fullerton, California, and shows the poor restoration of a microtrenching installation. Repairs mean downtime and disruption to service and can also lead to additional costs. Finally, microtrenching is also subject to region-specific weather and traffic conditions. So sealants can degrade over time, especially with exposure to UV or water, temperature fluctuations, or heavy traffic loads. And it's important for us to acknowledge and understand these risks in order to think of ways to prevent and mitigate these damages. Now moving on to some considerations for our region. We know that microtrenching is a topic of growing interest. Local agencies are exploring options to expand high-speed internet access to their residents. And we have a wide range of experience from newer pilot projects to early adopters such as the city of Mesa. With this region-wide interest, it's really important for us to weigh the benefits and risks. And we can also further explore the following topics of national experience, wear and tear, licensing agreements, and best practices. So in response to this regional interest, MAG has initiated a research study with the Texas A&M Transportation Institute. And this research study will have three main components. The first is a literature review that will provide an overview of current microtrenching practices. Second, we'll also be conducting interviews with peer agencies and industry professionals to learn from their experiences. And finally, we'll consider the potential impacts and best practices for our region specifically. So this study is underway, and the results will help to inform the upcoming microtrenching working group. So in mid-January, we sent out an email soliciting interest in a manager's working group that would focus on microtrenching. We received a good amount of interest, but found that most responses wanted to delegate this to technical staff. Based on that, we recommend moving forward with a technical staff working group. This will allow for the experts themselves to provide insights and also be able to inform additional research. And the purpose of this group will be to provide that baseline technical information that can serve as a foundation for local agencies to make their own decisions regarding microtrenching implementations. So as your agencies are considering or even implementing microtrenching, here are some factors that this working group can discuss. The first is coordination and communication. So we've heard from peer agencies that microtrenching can require really complex coordination regarding maintenance and repair. They highly emphasize the importance of having a local contact, not only during the installation process, but also afterwards to help address any concerns. This working group should also consider conditions that are specific to our region, such as the extreme summer heat, UV exposure, and potential impact of monsoon season. And as we start to review technical standards from peer agencies and municipalities, the question arises of whether we want to develop any regional standards or guidance as well. Some examples of standards that have been adopted include limitations on the minimum depth of microtrenching and limiting microtrenching to residential streets. And finally, this working group should consider the impact on residents when looking at the risks and benefits, really figuring out in what situations is microtrenching a proper alternative. So for next steps, we will convene a technical working group and act as the regional forum for ongoing collaboration, providing technical expertise to support local decision-making. But we also want to provide this opportunity today for members of the committee to provide some input on the scope and direction of that technical working group. So some questions to consider are, how should this group balance technical and policy level considerations? And also, are there any timing considerations that we should be aware of in terms of your local implementation efforts? That concludes my presentation. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll leave it on this previous slide for questions and comments.
Just to add on to that with Maggie is, it's clear that the more technical people need to do it. But as you all know, this is not ultimately a technical decision. This is ultimately a decision that you have to balance what your technical folks tell you with the realities in your community and your policymakers. So we want to move forward with that working group, but want your input and thoughts on really that balance is going to be key.
Thank you, Maggie. Any questions or comments from the committee? Kevin?
No, I just want to say thanks to Ed and the staff for putting this together. I'm not sure why everybody looked at me when they said they wanted to delegate down. It was Patrick's idea. So just.
Anything else? Chris?
So, yeah, you guys, go do your committees and everything, but if you really wanted to see what's happening, just come to Mesa. We've put down 2.7 million miles or feet, sorry, miles. I wish I feet of completed micro trenching right now. And it is fascinating. You can literally walk right behind the micro trencher. You can see it cut. You can see the depth. It has brought a very competitive environment for fiber in our community for them providers. And so as most of us experienced during COVID, sometimes you didn't have a lot of choices about who your provider was. And sometimes that worked out and sometimes it didn't work out so well. Now we have, I think, at least 3 or if not 4 different providers competing in the city. Now, the micro trenching, and Ed is correct, if we're up to my streets director, this would never have happened. I get it. It's their asset. They're responsible for maintaining it. No one likes cuts through their streets. Utility guys, very concerned. And so I would tell you, though, if you want to come and walk behind a micro trencher or go, and you said open trenching, I think the experience we're having now is a lot of boring from the other providers. If you want to hear the stories between the difference between micro trenching and boring, it's dramatic. And the impacts, the conflicts that get created. Now, every community may be different. I will tell you that from personal experience, micro trenching in front of my house, you would not know it was there. It looks like a crack seal, essentially going straight down the curb line or just outside the curb. So I think from the perspective of you're going to have to find a way to get fiber. It's the future, right? It's what everybody wants, everybody needs. And the rates are just, for the speed and what you pay now, it's incredible what's coming, and that competition is doing well. So if there's a committee, I'd welcome you to come. You can probably, in Mesa, I can assure you'll find micro trenching easily. And then you can stand and go watch a site that's doing boring. And you can come to some pretty quick conclusions. It is, no one likes a lot of construction cones and trucks with contractors up and down their streets. But they're, as far as the micro trenching, they seem to be getting in and out of there pretty quickly. But there's a term you pointed out, and it's true. The communication, the coordination, having my inspectors stand there and watch it all the time. We struggled at the beginning. There were some challenges. Part of that is ramping up with the contractors and the subcontractors that have to come in and know how to do this. So anyway, I would just open invitation that if one of the first field trips is, come to Mesa, walk behind a micro trencher, go find a boring, and then we'll be glad to share with you how we're collecting fees to make sure we cover the cost of our inspectors and all the staff time that it takes to review the permits and the traffic plans. We'll be glad to do that. But we're full steam ahead getting fiber out to our community, and people are loving it. So anyway, thank you.
Sounds like Chris is volunteering to chair this committee in
I did that once,
retirement.
and I don't know if I'm off that committee yet. Yeah, they finally killed that committee.
Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you.
I think
Next
Chris
up-
decided the only way to get off that committee was to retire.
Next up on the agenda, item number 8 is the development of Proposition 479 Freeway Life Cycle Program. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion. John Bullen, Assistant Executive Director, will present. John?
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the MAG Management Committee, here to present an update on the development of the Prop 479 Freeway Lifecycle Program. So just by way of quick reminder, the Regional Strategic Transportation Infrastructure Investment Plan, or RSTIP for short, was unanimously approved by the MAG Regional Council back in the summer of 2021. This capped off more than 4 years worth of planning to identify a series of programs and projects to be funded in part through the extension of Maricopa County's dedicated half-cent sales tax, or Prop 479. As part of the RSTIP, we identified a total of 79 freeway and highway projects within the funded program. In addition to the specific projects, there were a number of programmatic line items funded, including pavement rehabilitation around the region, as well as the continuation of funding for litter, landscape, and sweeping. So our task now turns to implementation. Specifically, what we need to do is to turn the high-level planning work into an actual financial plan for project and program implementation for the next 20 plus years. So as we do that, there's really three primary considerations we need to keep in mind when it comes to developing the Prop 479 Freeway Lifecycle Program. First, we have statutory requirements. Specifically, state statute requires that estimated revenues for the program do not exceed estimated costs over the term of the half-cent sales tax. And so when we look at this, we look both from an ending balance perspective as well as year over year to make sure that we can maintain the commitments that we program as part of the FLCP. The next task that we need to embark on is developing specific sequencing. So when we put the plan together, we identified projects and phasing within 5-year increments. So rather than identify specific construction years, we identified projects as phase 1, which are the first 5 years of the program, phase 2, the next 5, so on and so forth. And then finally, as we put the program together, we need to consider the changes that have occurred since summer of 2021. Obviously, conditions have changed, needs have changed, projects have changed, and we need to take that into account as we build the actual FLCP itself. So I want to start first by walking through the development of a fiscally balanced program, and specifically remind this group of a couple of things that we talked about last month. When we developed project estimates, we did so in collaboration with ADOT. One of our lessons learned from Prop 400 is that we really needed to pay attention to project cost estimates. As such, we went through a very robust process looking through each project, developing high-level estimates associated with each project, and we did so in 2020 dollars. That basically reflects that at the time, we didn't know when specific construction would occur, and as such, we needed a constant year basis. Those project costs were supported by revenue estimates that were also in 2020 dollars throughout the term of the FLCP itself. And then there was built-in assumptions primarily based on historic experiences that any increase in construction costs would be equal to or less than revenue estimates. And obviously that presents the biggest challenge that we're going to have to work through because that has not held up over the last 4 years. So what you can see on the screen here is the total estimated project costs in 2020 dollars. From the fall of 2020, we estimated that in total projects would cost approximately $12.8 billion. When we went through the exercise last fall into the winter of updating those project costs, what we now find is that the new updated cost estimate for all the projects in the program is roughly $20.7 billion. That represents a 61.5% increase. All things considered, it could be much worse, certainly based on the presentation that we gave last month. We could have seen costs much higher. Also based on the presentation we gave last month, while we have seen higher costs, we've also seen higher revenues. So here's a slide that we presented last month that shows the different revenues that flow into the RSTIP. When we look at the FLCP specifically, there are 3 revenue streams that flow in. There's the dedicated half-cent sales tax authorized through Prop 479. There's a portion of statewide highway user revenue fund, HERF funding, that you see down at the bottom. And then there's a portion of federal formula funds that flow to ADOT and then are made available in the MAG region. So when we look at the updated estimates and we put them in constant dollars, our total revenues are approximately $4.2 billion higher than what we had estimated back in the fall of 2020. So certainly that's good news and helps address some of the cost increases that we had seen. So when we put the program together, we were extremely conservative. Specifically, we maintained a healthy fund balance. We had assumptions related to debt expenses, wanting to make sure that we had adequate funding available for bonding. And it turns out that all of those were very good decisions in hindsight because it helps mitigate some of the impacts that we have seen. So specifically, depending on what assumptions you use, particularly at the end of the program with project sequencing, our preliminary analysis indicates that we're looking at a total deficit between $2 billion and $3 billion at the end of 2045. The good news, however, though, is that when you use conservative assumptions, we actually find that the program is in balance through the first 2 phases. So through the end of phase 2, that largely relates to the point that Mr. Stone had presented last month, which is that as we compare the revenue estimates from last fall to those in 2020, we've actually seen a greater increase in the near term than over the long term. As a result, we are not recommending that we go through the full freeway program rebalance. Instead, we're recommending a more measured approach, recognizing that the program is largely stable over the next 10 years. There are a lot of planning level assumptions when you look out 20 years in the future. A lot can and will change between now and then. Certainly Prop 400 is a great example of that. And a couple examples up here on the screen, if you just consider the variability in construction costs between now and 45, we're going to see some dips, we're going to see some increases. It's anyone's guess what those will do. We have a number of projects for which we have zero formal planning or scoping work done. It's anyone's guess what those projects are. A great example is if you look at an interchange funded in the 479 program, there's an acknowledgement that we're going to need to do something over the next 20 years, but there's a number of interchanges for which we have no idea what that solution is. So as a result, we're recommending a very measured approach to rebalancing the 479 freeway program. Specifically, we want to look at 3 different strategies as we put the program together. First, we want to either eliminate or greatly reduce the amount of funding set aside for debt service. So when we put the program together, we assumed more than $500 million in 2020 of debt. If we eliminate that, that greatly reduces the deficit at the end of the program between for projects. The second item is we want to assume that there's going to be some degree of construction cost stabilization over the next 20 years. We have a forecast in place for the next 3, 4, 5 years with relatively modest increases. But at some point, we're going to see some degree of a market correction, and there's no reason to assume a high growth rate throughout the balance of the program. And then finally, we want to assume that there's going to be some degree of cost containment through value engineering. A great example is as we've matured things on State Route 30 and Loop 303, it turns out that we can restack some of the levels of the interchanges. That exercise, which resulted from a 4-hour workshop, resulted in a more than $125 million cost savings to the project. So that's one example of relatively modest work being put in to an effort that has brought down costs significantly. So these are the strategies we feel like we can get the program in balance if we align with each 3. And in particular, we're in good shape for the first 10 years. Next, I want to walk through some of the near-term project sequencing. As I had mentioned, when we put the plan together, we did so in 5-year increments. The projects up here are phase 1 projects that we had identified back in the summer of 2021. So what we need to do is actually go through the exercise of establishing near-term project sequencing. Funding for the 479 freeway program starts January 1, 2026. That's in fiscal year 2026. So there's a need to initiate this work soon, particularly because we want to get some of these projects queued up and ready to go. So the first project I want to walk through are planned improvements at Loop 303 at I-17, as well as completion of the Loop 303 corridor. So this is a project that was originally in Prop 400 program, but was deferred out. A couple of years ago, the legislature appropriated money to initiate final design. That final design is set to be completed this spring. So we are recommending, and we have done a cash flow analysis, and the cash flow supports advancement of this project to this current fiscal year 2025. In part to help accommodate this advancement, we are recommending that we defer out 2 funded Prop 400 freeway projects. The first being I-10 at Sky Harbor, the West Airport improvements. It makes sense to push this project back to align with other Prop 479 freeway improvements. And the second is I-17 at Indian School. Again, this is another example of a project that makes sense to push back a few years to align with broader I-17 improvements. The next project is the Loop 101 at 91st Avenue Connector. This is a project that we're actually in final design right now. Final design is slated to be completed this spring. We're designing it as part of a Prop 400 funded direct HOV ramp between Loop 101 and I-10. The scope of that improvement is essentially covers the same geographic area as the 91st Avenue Connector project. So we're recommending that we accelerate construction so that we can do it as part of one contract. This will result in both cost savings as well as minimizing disruptions to the traveling public. And I do want to note that this is one of the few projects for which the cost estimate actually went down as we got more information on the project scope. Next, traveling out to the West Valley, I-10 at Jackrabbit Trail. This is a freeway interchange for which there's a lot of pressure as a result of development. Slightly north of this, you have a at-grade stop sign intersection with Jackrabbit Trail and McDowell. You have a lot of utility conflicts. It results in backups onto the I-10 main line. This project is in final design. We'll be ready to go to construction in winter of 2025. And as such, we are recommending that we program construction in fiscal year 2026. Down in the Southeast Valley, State Route 24 between Loop 202 and Ironwood Drive. Prop 400 built this freeway in an interim condition, so it's 2 lanes in each direction with signalized intersections. It's in final design right now, slated to be completed in the spring of 2026. So we are recommending programming construction in fiscal year 2026. And then finally, State Route 30. We have funding allocated as part of the Prop 400 program for advanced right-of-way acquisition, plus some utility work. When we look at the State Route 30 center segment, it's actually broken up into 6 smaller projects, 5 different implementation phases, and the facility itself is set to be constructed from the east moving west. So the first segment between 97th Avenue and Loop 202 is under final design now, slated to be completed in the spring of 2027. So we are recommending programming construction when that final design is completed in the spring of 2027. Next, we need to walk through adjustments to projects and phasing. So there's been a lot of time that has lapsed between the time the plan was approved and where we sit today, nearly 4 years. In recognition that things change, conditions change, the freeway program is something that we normally update every year. Obviously, as we're moving from planning level work to implementation, we haven't done the updates over the last 4 years, so we have some catch up to do. So I want to walk through a couple of our recommendations as we look to put the program together. First, I had briefly touched on the State Route 30 facility. Here's a nice visual that shows the 6 different project segments, 5 for implementation. We know that this facility it has a lot of challenges associated with it, utility challenges, drainage challenges. And so we have been collaborating with ADOT and will continue to collaborate with ADOT to look at what a realistic implementation scenario is. Specifically, what we need to do is move from 2020, 2021, where we knew conditions at that point in time, to where we're at today. Recognize some of the realities of the impact of the veto and the delay in the project, and come up with a new implementation assessment. So we'll have additional information that we intend on presenting in April 2025 on the implementation of State Route 30 center segment specifically. Within the plan, there's also funding that's been allocated for the preliminary project development work of the western segment of State Route 30. So that's between State Route 85 and Loop 303. Consistent with that funding that's been identified in the RSTIP, we are recommending that we initiate that project development work, scoping and environmental work in fiscal year 2027. Next, looking at the Northwest Valley, Loop 303 around US 60. We've given several presentations on the challenges up in this area as a result of really significant growth over the last couple of years. If you look at growth from 2020 to where we're at today, we have significantly more people up there. So as part of the RSTIP, we identified a new freeway interchange at Loop 303 and Litchfield Drive. As MAG has been conducting our US 60 Loop 303 to State Route 74 study, as we've been working with ADOT on other assessments up in that area, it's become apparent that really the need for the new TI is closer to the US 60 Loop 303, at least in the short term. So what we're recommending is that we actually exchange projects in the RSTIP. So exchange Loop 303 at Litchfield Road with a new TI project, Loop 303 at 155th Avenue. and initiate the development work immediately. And then as we put together the cash flow, if it supports advancing construction of that facility from phase 2 to phase 1. Similarly, we're seeing pressures at the ultimate system interchange at US 60 Loop 303. We are recommending that we initiate development activities for that within phase 1 and then advance construction to that if the cash flow supports it to phase 2. State Route 347 between the city of Maricopa and I-10. This is another area that's really challenged by significant growth. This is the primary way in and out of the city of Maricopa to the Phoenix metropolitan area. Heavily congested corridor. You see a lot of safety challenges with it. We have funding as part of the Prop 479 program, as part of the FLCP for the Maricopa County section of it. So what we're recommending is that we position this project to be able to advance if funding becomes available for the Pinal County portion. So this is the unique project in that it's truly going to need to be a partnership between the MAG region and the state to deliver these improvements. And then finally, looking out in the East Valley, US 60 between Ellsworth and Meridian Road. If you look at US 60 today, really between Loop 101 out to the Super Rad Tan interchange, you have as many as 12 lanes in each direction. When you get further out towards East Mesa or Apache Junction, it tapers down. There's a need to improve, again, in recognition of the growth. So what we're recommending is that we advance development to phase 1 and construction to phase 2 if the cash flow supports it. And then finally, just a quick note, as part of the FLCP, we have funding identified for pavement rehabilitation around the region. We've initiated work with ADOT to look at where the priorities are. We included that report as part of your information summary today. And essentially our recommendation is that we follow the sequencing identified as part of that report. So what are the next steps? So this month we are intending on just presenting these concepts, walking through the challenges that we have to get feedback. Based on the feedback that we get, we'll start to actually develop the specific program itself, developing the sequencing. We intend on bringing that back to April, again, just for information, discussion, reactions, additional insight, and then depending on where things land and how things go, we could be looking at formal approval for the program as soon as May or June of this summer. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, John. Any questions from members of the committee? Ben?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Bowen, for the presentation. Just wanted to thank you for mentioning State Route 347. For us, that's obviously our first, second, and third biggest issues, and so very important for us. I think we're on track for a solution for the Pinal County funding, and look forward to seeing that move forward for the region. Our taxpayers spend about $1.3 billion a year in Maricopa County, and so that portion of the roadway that's in Maricopa County is certainly well paid for over and over again, even by our own residents. And so excited to see that move forward for nothing else than just the livelihood of our community. So thanks for the call out there.
Any other questions? Bob?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say, I think I can speak for a lot of us, Ed and Sean and your team. This approach is so thoughtful, so professional, and your working closely with ADOT and the discipline and the science that you use to do this, you create a lot of good for the whole valley. And just really appreciate how you're putting this together to make sure that you're helping all of us in the region, and it's just a great approach. Thank you.
Anything else?
Chair, go ahead.
I'll echo that. I just thank him for the collaboration that he's had with ADOT and how they've balanced everything and been able to look at it comprehensively. But the collaboration, I just want to appreciate. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
Reyes?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'll echo Ms. Toth, echo of Mr. Wingenroth. I was a young man when the concept of the 91st Avenue connector was proposed, and now I'm wearing Hawaiian shirts in the wintertime like a real snowbird. So I honestly am grateful personally, and on behalf of the city of Towson, to Mr. Zerker, John, Audra, Quinn, if you're in the room, and so many others at MAG. along with ADOT for being true partners with us throughout this ordeal. We've been through a lot to get to this point, and we want to thank all of you as well for your support. Wouldn't have happened. We wouldn't have gotten this far without all of you. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Anything else? Great job, John. Ed, great job. Just one question for me is you mentioned the debt piece. So you're taking all debt out, so you'll do pay-go throughout the duration is what?
Mr. Chairman, members of the management committee, I think the real answer to that is it depends. I think our starting point is to largely eliminate all debt. I think based on some of the feedback that we'll get in subsequent committee presentations, that might inform whether or not some degree of debt issuance is needed. But just looking at it, it's hard to imagine that we're going to really the need for the debt is going to be in the immediate term. And certainly based on our preliminary cash flow analysis, we're able to do a lot of the pay as you go, particularly with some of the bigger projects. Those are 4 or 5 year drawdowns. And so there's opportunity to recoup revenues there.
I think that's actually a very prudent approach. I mean, when you look at some of the things that are on the agenda for the administration, they're also talking about taking away tax exempt status from municipal bonds and debt. So that would only add to your problem should you consider to do that. So great work. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Next item on the agenda is item number 9. Yes, development of the MAG fiscal year FY 26-27 biannual unified planning work program and budget. This item is on the agenda for information and discussion. Kathy Christensen, accounting program manager, will present the update. Kathy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, members of the Management Committee. I'm here today to discuss the development of the draft biennial unified planning work program and budget. The MAG Unified Planning priorities and activities are outlined in the UPWEP and are to be carried out within the metropolitan planning area. It details who will perform the work, project schedules, project costs, and funding sources. Although the UPWEP is developed biannually, it is managed by each fiscal year. Once approved, the amendments to the work program need to be submitted to ADOT for FHWA approval. The UPWEP contains 3 main components. The programs in brief, which is a summary budget document that usually is about 15 to 20 pages and is meant to serve as a tool for quick understanding of the financial implications of the MAG budget. The overview and work program elements section, which contain a detailed breakout of planned activities, and the budget section, which includes the financial allocations and financial details. MAG's fiscal year 2025 budget is approximately $38.1 million in revenues, the majority of which is allocated to transportation and agency support expenditures. The development process is structured incrementally to allow for input at various stages. This month, the draft member dues and assessments and preliminary lists of proposed project funding are being presented. These items have also been included in the Management Committee packet agenda. In March, staff changes and proposed salary increases will be presented, and in April, the draft FY 2026-2027 narratives will be presented, which will also contain 2 of the 3 main components, the programs in brief and the overview and work program elements. And in May, the document will be submitted for approval. The dues and assessments account for less than 3% of MAG's operating budget and are used to help fund specific projects as directed by member agencies. The proposed FY 2026 dues and assessments reflect a 4.13 consumer price index increase and the elimination of the 911 planning assessment. Ongoing work associated with 911 activities are now included in the member agency dues. Additionally, the water quality assessment has been reduced to match anticipated work. The proposed FY 2027 dues and assessments include a 2.9% CPIU increase and an increase to the solid waste assessment for regional requested research updates. The calculations were reflected the calculations reflect the FY 2025 population numbers that were approved by the MAG Regional Council on December 4th, 2024.
So just a note on the dues and assessments, we want to do those early because you have to have them to plug into your own budgeting at the cities. So overall in 26, there's a decrease in dues in the big picture. Individual results may vary depending on situations you've had with dues and assessments in the past year, largely because of the elimination of the planning assessment, although some of that is moved into the dues from a special assessment in order to have resources to do what the work group had suggested, which was be ready to step in with some studies or some staff work on the statewide 911 assessment question. Also, we've right-sized the water quality assessment. So those of you who have that assessment hit your water fund, you'll see that should decrease slightly. So, but then for 27, it goes up slightly, and that's largely driven by a solid waste assessment, which is coming from your staff who serve on the solid waste technical committee would like MAG in 2027 to update a best practices report that was done 10 years previously. So just check in with your folks and make sure that works for you as you take a look at the dues that are specific to your city that are in the packet this month. So just a little more detail there, because that's where you're going to probably want to dig in and just make sure you're setting your budgeting for the dues. Although relatively speaking, our dues are pretty insignificant as it relates to our entire MAG budget. For your each individual city, that is something you need to take into account.
Thank you, Kathy. Any questions for Kathy or Director Zerker?
She's got a couple
Oh,
more
I'm sorry.
slides. I
Sorry.
interjected too soon.
I thought you were closing her out, Ed.
The provided list of proposed project funding includes the project name, description, cost estimate, and anticipated completion timeline. Most of the proposed funding for FY 2026 and 2027 is allocated to 31 transportation projects, totaling just over $18.5 million. In addition to those projects, there are 5 environmental projects totaling just over $33.8 million, and a community initiatives project for $70,000. A few projects to highlight include the Airport Travel Survey, the Central Valley Transportation Corridor Study, the US 60 Ironwood Drive to Superstition Mountain Drive Corridor Study, the US 60 Grand Avenue Corridor Optimization Study, and the Solid Waste Project Programs and MAG Regional Update Study that was requested. Thank you. That concludes my presentation.
Sorry, Kathy. I didn't mean to drag you off the stage early. Thought Ed was closing you out. Any questions for Kathy? Thank you. Next up is our air quality update. This item's on the agenda for information and discussion. Matt Poppin, Environmental Director, will present the update.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Management Committee. I have a really brief update to share today. I wanted to highlight just 2 updates, one related to ozone, one related to particulate matter, in particular PM 2.5. So first, starting with ozone, we're currently, as a refresher, we're designated as a moderate non-attainment area, and there's certain Clean Air Act requirements that we have to meet in order to turn off sanctions that EPA or sanctions clocks that could be triggered if we don't turn those off. MAG staff has completed a draft plan to turn that off. That's currently out for public review. That will come through our technical committee in March, and then again to management and regional council in April. So we'll get that done and up to EPA. But I wanted to let you know that that's out there. Additionally, one of the actions taken today was to recommend the approval of a consultant selection in the consent agenda for our 179B demonstration. That's the demonstration of international emissions. So that will be starting once that consultant is approved by our regional council executive committee. That will start up in March, and we'll start to get an idea of how much of our ozone is coming from Mexico and possibly from Asia as well. And then lastly, in regards to particulate matter, if you remember back in February of 2024, EPA issued a brand new PM 2.5 standard, which is much stricter than the current standard. The governor was supposed to submit non-attainment area boundary recommendations for that standard for both Maricopa and Pinal County. The governor has decided to not submit recommendations at this time. And so what that means is then EPA will be the ones, EPA ultimately sets the designations anyway for those boundaries. But that will be the next step, is we'll wait and see the boundaries that EPA puts forward. So that's my update. If there's any questions, I'm happy to address those.
Any questions for Matt? Seeing none. Thank you, Matt. Next up, Ed, do you have an executive director's report?
Just one quick thing, which is to congratulate MacDOT, Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian Community, and the city of Mesa on their joint project to open the Gilbert Road Bridge. That's a big deal for our East and Northeast Valley members. Well done. It was part of the Prop 400 project, and that's really a huge improvement. So congratulations on that. That's it, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Next up on the agenda is the legislative update. This item's on the agenda for information and discussion. Samantha Klakalak, Government Relations Project Manager, will present the update.
Thank you, Chair Barton, members of Management Committee. So we are now in the 5th week of the legislative session. The deadline for bills to be dropped has passed, and the deadline for bills to be heard in committee within their chamber of origin is next Friday, February 21st. So things are moving along pretty quickly. We continue to monitor several transportation, housing, and environmental quality bills. Notably, Senate Bill 1092, Vehicle Mileage Tracking Tax Prohibitions, and its companion, Senate Concurrent Resolution 1004, prohibit the state or any political subdivision of the state from tracking or monitoring vehicle miles traveled or implementing a tax or fee based on vehicle miles traveled. This passed out of Senate Government Committee on a party line vote and was heard in Senate caucus yesterday. SB 1086, Transportation System Performance, ADOT, passed through the Senate Public Safety Committee on a party line vote as well. This bill is similar to a bill that was introduced last session that addresses transportation planning, related definitions, and transportation system performance factors for highways, arterial, and transit projects. Prop 479 enabling legislation points to this statute, so this bill could have implications on our enabling legislation and the implementation of Prop 479. Lastly, and notably, a bill that has been introduced, SB 1284, Fireworks Aerials Licensure Penalties, which is similar to legislation introduced in previous years, in which many of your cities and towns in previous years have signed in opposed. This year so far, we've only noted that the county has signed in opposed, but if you recall Matt Poppin's air quality presentation from last month surrounding the sharp increase of PM 2.5 around the holidays, specifically around December 31st and January 1st, we wanted to flag this for you all as it's expanding allowable consumer fireworks, which will have an impact on air quality efforts in the region, specifically around PM 2.5. That completes my report, Chair Barton, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Samantha. Any questions for Samantha? Seeing none. Next item on the agenda is request for future agenda items. Are there any requests from the membership for future agenda items? Seeing none. Any comments from the committee or the membership?
Chairman.
Jeff Kalaga.
I just want to announce this month marks Town of Guadalupe's 50th anniversary of incorporation. We're incorporated back in February 1975, founded in 1904. So that comes up in any trivia contest here in the next couple of weeks. You got that. So we celebrated this past week with a Saturday night celebration. The bounce houses, the carnival, the petting zoo, car show, etc. So it's happy 50th all month in Guadalupe. Thank you.
Happy 50th. No fireworks though, right?
Not that I know of.
All right. And nothing else. Our next meeting is March 12th, 2025 at 12 p.m. with no further business. We are adjourned.